Namaskar and welcome to Public Forum. I am Charu Karthike. In this edition of Public Forum, we take a look at the outcome of the 18th SAARC summit that was recently held in Kathmandu. Some payoff was visible in Kathmandu. Your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, electricity trade, Prime Minister said at his speech that we should look at energy as a commodity that can actually be transferred. And I think so the fact that they've agreed to that is something to take home. But think about the expectations of our peoples, the expectations of our business community, expectations of, the people on the border regions. We have failed them in the sense that, the regional integration project has been so slow. And again, Prime Minister mentioned that, we need speed and we've been very slow. And despite this whole plethora of institutionalization, we've got committees and forums and task forces and mechanisms and so on, and funds that keep getting announced. The sum, net, if you add them all up, is that we are not creating the value add for our peoples and for our business community. So that's the failure of, I think, the state structures and the politicians. And the Prime Minister was actually rightly self-critical. And in fact, if you remember, he broke out into Hindi at the end of his speech, and he said, 1 plus 1 plus 1, we can add up 8 countries of SAARC, and that's all we will be. But that is if we are pass, as in close by, only country. But if we are saath, which is if we actually become united, we can be like, a billion, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and so on. So, but then for us to reach that stage, I think we have not also been very creative. I feel like we have not really looked at other, regional or sub-regional organizations around the world, how they have sorted out these domestic opposition to closer integration. So there's a lot of homework, really. And 30 years, frankly, we are not in this SAARC is not in its infancy anymore. It is in a way like a middle-aged institution. And I think we have never really been able to fulfill that potential. We look at the statistics which people talk about, be it in trade, be it in poverty reduction. In fact, way back in the 90s, there was a SAARC summit in Dhaka where we agreed that by 2002 we'll eradicate poverty. And now we're 2014 and we're nowhere close, right? So I think that regional spirit, while it is there, and I agree with Salman Haider Saab, but then, it's more aspirational, and we have not really converted that into reality where we can lift our people out of poverty through closer and closer integration. That's not happened, and let's be fair, I think Prime Minister also mentioned that we are hiding behind these walls of prejudice. That's the word he used, and the baggage of history. So clearly, I hope Prime Minister can set an example and lead us into a closer integration, because otherwise we are talking about a divided region. And one where, in fact, some people are arguing that there is now a pro-China camp within SAARC. It's not looking good.
Given that perspective, will it be fair to say that even the 18th summit will also be remembered as yet another summit, nothing landmark, a part of the continuing narrative about the failure of SAARC that has been continuing for the last few years?
Yeah, I don't think it's a landmark. If the motor vehicles agreement and the rail connectivity and all those had been agreed unanimously by all, I think it would have been seen as a success, as a bigger success. But at the end of the day, what after the summits? I mean, the thing is, we have a lot of these mechanisms in place where there are smaller group meetings and so on that keep on happening throughout the year. But the real push has to come, I think, through India taking a lead, being more magnanimous, creating more opportunities for our neighbors. And at the same time, of course, I think Pakistan is the second largest country in the region. Within SAARC there is so-called LDC group, the least developed countries. And then there are the developing ones which are doing better. The onus is on the developing ones, the larger ones, to really take the responsibility and show the leadership. Because we cannot hold the smaller ones' fates hostage to our, petty problems. And we cannot be possessive about the whole thing. We cannot. Multilateralism means that everybody should be seeing some collective gains and benefits. That's not happening.
Sriram, your take on what we were talking about, the motor vehicles agreement and the role played by Pakistan.
Yeah, the transit countries, I think, have a potential of leveraging, collective gain, or just sabotaging the whole thing. So, in that sense, actually, India is also, if you think about all the SAARC countries, we are in a way very central, and because we are a large landmass, the fact that we are on board at least means that for some of the countries on to our right flank with whom we have better relationships, like Bangladesh, we should be able to do it on a bilateral basis, so at least the trade is moving. See, because Prime Minister, in fact, warned the grouping that, the world is moving towards closer and closer integration, and whether we want it within SAARC or outside it, it's going to happen. And what he meant was clearly, he was saying that, we will go ahead wherever possible on a bilateral basis or trilateral basis. For example, there's a Bangladesh, Myanmar, India-China corridor which has been spoken about, and so on. So these things are going to happen. It's because, the economic forces cannot wait endlessly, right? So they need an outlet, and they will look for a way and a path. In a way, it's also interesting that if you think about the transit problem, the even underground, the pipelines also, we are not sure about either the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline or the Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline, which have both been talked about for a long time for gas, right? So even subterranean security, if we cannot, manage, what is the likelihood of security, for these, for our trucks, for example, commercial vehicles, to be even passing through these territories where, potentially could be hijacked or attacked by terrorists. So, and who's going to guarantee them? Even the Lahore-Delhi bus, it's always secured by, police on all sides when they move and they clear the road and so on. So I think essentially, in a way, we are hoping for the best, but the underlying political disputes are such that and the animosities, especially among the extremist elements, are such. There is anti-India sentiment not only in Pakistan but also in some of the other neighboring countries. But I think Modi is the game changer, because I think Modi is the one, even with Nepal, the Maoists appreciated him. I think Modi is, because Modi is talking about how India's rise cannot be disentangled or decoupled from the neighborhood, and in that sense he's saying that we will share our prosperity with you. So I think that's the message. It needs to be emphasized not only rhetorically but through actions. So even if the whole of SAARC is not willing to allow easy transit, and because of this negative veto that even one member can stymie the whole thing, we'll have to look at bilateral, trilateral, even quadrilateral forms, with Bhutan, with Nepal, with Bangladesh, with Sri Lanka via sea. We'll have to shore up. Unfortunately, the Afghanistan connection with us will remain cut off because of geographical reality of this transit state in between, which is intransigent.
Sriram, the South Asian Economic Union is something that has long been talked about, probably something which will help achieve which will help SAARC achieve its fullest potential, is this economic union, such an ambitious plan that has been talked about. But once again, the way the 7th declaration mentioned it, it only seems a representation of some bureaucracies, that the leaders renewed their commitment to achieve South Asian Economic Union in a phased and planned manner through a free trade area, blah, blah, blah. Clear cut. Finally, this was not achieved. We don't know whether much headway did actually come through regarding the South Asian Economic Union, something ambitious, very long been talked of. In fact, it was even compared to the European Union and the way the integration has taken place in Europe, that would happen in South Asia still continues to be a very elusive concept. Were you expecting some major headway, and how much have your expectations been met?
Well, I think the trade, accelerating trade is the surest. In fact, all common market areas, be it the European Union or ASEAN or Mercosur in Latin America, they start with freer trade, and then common market means free movement of personnel and professionals to move across, offer services across borders, and then eventually we can even talk about currency union and those kind of big things. So these projects are phase by phase. So South Asian Economic Union will depend upon, in many ways, complementarities of the industrial structures of various countries, and also how do we ameliorate the losses to those who are damaged by competition. These are all the critical questions of trade liberalization, which we often face, the political economic questions. Our region is full of oligopolies and monopolies because they don't face competition much, from neighboring players. So to be able to create more, freer market conditions with more competition from others is good for consumers, is good for the economy, it keeps inflation under check, freer trade. So, but for all that to happen, you look at the Pakistan case, what we call the most favored nation, or the NDMA as they call it now. All these, these have been denied largely on non-economic grounds. I mean, if you look at it, there are sections of Pakistani economy which will benefit if they give a most favored nation status to us, and that can be a stepping stone for economic union.
Right.
But then there are others, maybe automobiles. They say a few sectors. So if you do a sector-wise, very granular analysis, you will find that there will always be winners and losers. Our failure, collective failure of SAARC has been we have not been able to pacify and mollify the losers and to get them on board by giving them side payments or some other benefits on the other side. So what it means at the end is that the losers are maybe not representative of the whole populations of our countries, but they're vociferous, they're protectionist, they're lobbies, and they're blocking these things. The other thing is purely non-economic logic, the security kind of fears. What will happen if Indian spies are roaming all over the place, that kind of thing. So it's got to be a mixture of the two. That's how we move towards economic union. And I think the asymmetry of power is one problem, if not insuperable, but an important problem in our region. Because unlike the European Union, where there's France, there's Britain, and there's Germany, and although Germany is dominant, it still doesn't have a phenomenal lead over France or Italy or Britain. They're all heavily industrialized countries, and which are all in the top 10 economies in the world, right? Of course, Germany is powerful, but doesn't mean the rest are very far behind. But in India's case, we have been growing faster. Pakistan is almost like in a basket case situation, getting bailed out by IMF. The insecurities are higher, So that's why one of the reasons there's no economic union progress is people feel that it means that Indians will just get a huge market access, Indian exporters will benefit, and nobody else is going to get anything. So to reverse that, actually, in a way, it's beyond our control. One of the things that needs to happen is some of these economies need to grow faster. Sri Lanka is growing faster, but then it's very small, So some degree of parity will reduce the insecurity. Otherwise, people think all these proposals Modi is bringing is, the worst case scenario they will say is, what it means is Indian business, Indian industry will benefit, and the rest of us are going to be exploited. That's how it's going to be put forward. So we need to change the
He said it in as many words. He said it in as many words. The Prime Minister in his speech, he talks about the interests of the Indian industry. He talks about the need for jobs for the youth in other countries. But then the overreaching precedence that he emphasizes on is the needs of the Indian industry.
That's true, but see, he spoke about only 1% of our outward FDI is in our neighborhood. He's saying we should invest more. The onus is also on us, so that it generates jobs for our neighbors. It creates a basis for neighbors to also export.
He did make that admission. He said that the onus is on us, but then he also said that the onus is on you too, to attract our industries, to attract investment from our industries.
They need to see the value in it, right? They should not see anything that we bring in as a kind of a Trojan horse that's going to destroy their national sovereignty or weaken their domestic industry.
Sriram, now coming to the China factor. Even before the summit began, we saw there was widespread coverage of that booklet that Xinhua had published about China's interest in SAARC, about China's attempts to get Nepalese leaders to lobby for making China a full-fledged member of the SAARC, elevating it from the observer status. Of course, that did not happen as the summit ended. But was it still a sort of an elephant in the room, or was it a larger, a looming factor on the deliberations at the summit?
Yeah, I mean, as far as Nepal did anything that the Chinese wanted, but certainly Sri Lanka, Maldives, and of course Pakistan, which is an all-weather friend of China. All these three are been pushing for full membership for China in SAARC. And of course, there are reasons for us to resist this. The first being, China has not been very welcoming when we have bid for membership in other regional organizations. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, where China and Russia are dominant players. Russia has been always welcoming us, but the Chinese have been dragging for a very long time. It's only very recently we moved towards full membership. So think about Nuclear Suppliers Group. They have been trying to stymie even UN Security Council. We've been bidding for membership. The Chinese are not very unequivocal. The latest they say is, if you campaign together with Japan, we are not willing to endorse you. Detach yourself from Japan, then we'll think about you. So it's all conditional, provisional, and it's very calculated. So I don't think we should just give it on a platter. I mean, first of all, geographically speaking, China is not a South Asian country. And if at all a country deserves membership, it's Myanmar. And it needs to be there because although it's part of ASEAN, it's a kind of a bridge. It's Indo-China, right? It's both in South Asia and also in Southeast Asia. And it is in our best interest to have Myanmar come in as a full member. But I think Chinese presence, I mean, they can be there, and in fact, I think Maldives has said that they're already going to join the Southern Silk Road and the other initiative, the Silk Road Fund that President Xi Jinping has announced. So on a bilateral basis, they're already here. Nobody can deny it. Militarily, as you know, they've docked submarines in the coast of Sri Lanka. So if you take all these things, they're penetrating deeper. And it's a challenge for us. And I think when Modi says Saath, the idea is we need to fortify the region under Indian leadership. At the end of the day, it's all porous. We cannot prevent any. We are not possessive big brothers say, hey, you can't date China. But what we can do is to say that we also have an alternative, contiguity. If we think in terms of contiguity and connectivity, if we are doing better, if we are more proactive, I think we can ward off this challenge. We cannot prevent anybody from having relations with China, but what we must do is we must be smart enough to anticipate this threat, because if submarines are coming, it's a different level, right? It's not just Chinese building ports or bringing the caravans. So all this means that South Asia really, if it is divided now, if there is a pro-China camp, we will have to work very hard in our diplomacy to ensure that countries like Sri Lanka or Maldives are not falling away from our sphere of influence. And at the end of the day, the Chinese understand this because they also exercise sphere of influence politics. They also believe in great power politics. I don't think it's wrong on our part to resist their infiltration into our region.
Salman Haider, Sri Ram Chalia, Arun Jain, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.